You are 14 years old, standing under blazing torchlight, surrounded by faces that refuse to blink. The hall is packed, generals, nobles, courtiers, and at the center of it all stands your father, the most powerful ruler alive, the man sworn to protect you. Then, with wine on his breath and pride in his chest, he speaks a single sentence, a careless promise, a drunken grant, and suddenly your body no longer belongs to you. You don't understand what it means at first. You only feel the air die. Music cuts off mid-note. Conversations collapse into silence. Even the flames seem to hesitate. Across the floor, an old general, a man older than your grandfather, smiles slowly. He knows what this moment means. He knows your father cannot take it back. Not here. Not in front of the empire. Your hands tremble. Your mother hides her face. Every woman present understands exactly what has just been stolen from you. Your future, your freedom, your life. Your father doesn't look at you. He looks past you, at his honor, his image, the illusion of a god-king that must never crack. When he finally speaks again, it is only one word, grammed. Applause erupts. A bow is given, and you swallow a scream that will never be heard. Because in this palace, a king's pride weighs more than a daughter's pain. And this silent moment of public betrayal is where her life truly ends. Stay with me, because what followed lasted 14 years, and it was worse than death. To understand how this happened, you must understand the world she was born into. A world where a single man's word could reshape millions of lives. Xerxes was not simply a ruler. He was the king of kings, master of an empire stretching from Africa to India, from the Aegean to the edges of the known world. Nearly 50 million people lived under his command. According to ancient witnesses recorded by Herodotus, his words were not suggestions. They were law. A breath from his mouth could raise a city or erase it completely. But the true danger did not exist beyond the palace walls. It lived inside them. The Persian court was not a home. It was a sealed chamber of obedience. Eunuchs guarded every corridor. Servants spoke only when ordered. Silence was survival. No gossip escaped. No disagreement lived long. Everyone understood a terrifying rule. The closer you stood to power, the easier it was to be destroyed by it. Even the king's own family lived trapped by invisible chains. Their movements were controlled. Their meals were scheduled. Their words were monitored. Privacy did not exist. Choice did not exist. And for royal women, especially daughters, life was both elevated and terrifying. They were praised in ceremony and erased in reality. Treasures of the empire with less freedom than common servants. Royal daughters were rarely recorded by name. They were not remembered in monuments. They existed as tools, symbols, alliances, gifts wrapped in gold. And if that sounds cruel, what happened next was far worse. Her name was Amstress. She was born into this world, but her position was unusual. She shared her name with Xerxes' primary wife, the elder Amstress, remembered in history as fierce and unforgiving. The younger Amstress, however, was the king's daughter by a secondary concubine of Bactrian origin. Ancient sources noted her beauty as extraordinary, even by court standards where appearance was carefully cultivated. She was raised in the women's quarters of the palace, educated by eunuchs and elder women. She learned music, dance, poetry, and the refined arts expected of royalty. Yet unlike many princesses who were sent away in political marriages, Xerxes kept her close. What might sound like affection in another world would become the very reason for her destruction. Everything changed during a single banquet in 479 BCE, according to both Greek and Persian accounts. The details differ, but the core horror remains the same. Herodotus records the fullest version, drawn from Persian courtiers who later fled the empire. Xerxes had been drinking for days, surrounded by flatterers feeding his belief in his own divinity. In a moment of reckless pride, he stood before thousands and swore a sacred oath. He would grant any request made of him. It was a fatal promise. One man in the hall understood immediately. Artabanus, an aging general, once loyal to Xerxes' father, now sidelined and ambitious. He was over 60. He had already lost 3 wives, and he knew something crucial. Xerxes could not refuse a public request, not after military humiliation in Greece. To deny it would signal weakness to the empire. So Artabanus rose. He bowed, and he asked for the unthinkable. He asked for the king's daughter. Silence swallowed the whole. Everyone waited for outrage, for refusal, for punishment. Instead, the king froze. Herodotus describes Xerxes gripping his throne, his face drained of color, glancing around like a trapped animal. Long moments passed. Then, unable to break his oath, he spoke the word that sealed her fate, granted. With that single word, her life was no longer her own. The banquet ended, but the damage could not be undone. In the days that followed, ancient fragments suggest she tried to reach her father, not as a princess, not as a political figure, but as a frightened child. She begged him in private to undo the promise, to find some way out, to save her from a future she already feared. But Xerxes stood trapped between 2 forces he valued more than her life: his public image and the illusion of perfect authority. To him, refusing Artabanus now would humiliate a powerful general. Worse, it would expose weakness. And in an empire built on fear and obedience, weakness was dangerous. So Xerxes convinced himself this sacrifice was necessary. He repeated the excuse that tyrants across history have always used. The stability of the state mattered more than one person, even if that person was his daughter. 3 months later, the marriage took place. The ceremony was as lavish as any royal union in Persia. Silk embroidered with gold, jewels worth more than entire cities, musicians, incense, ritual blessings. But those who witnessed it remembered something deeply unsettling. Beneath the splendor, the young girl moved like someone already broken. Her face was calm, trained, obedient, yet empty. Her beauty only sharpened the cruelty of what was being done to her. Artabanus, meanwhile, looked victorious. He had secured more than a bride. He had bound himself permanently to the royal bloodline. He had turned a moment of drunken weakness into lifelong power. When the ceremony ended, the guests left. The music faded, and the true punishment began. The age gap alone shocked the court. She was barely 14. Artabanus was past 60. Even in a society accustomed to unequal marriages, this pairing disturbed many. Whispers filled corridors. Some blamed Artabanus' ambition. Others blamed Xerxes' pride. But blame did nothing to change her reality, because within weeks it became clear she had not entered a marriage. She had entered captivity. Artabanus kept her isolated inside his quarters. He forbade visits from her mother and sisters. He restricted servants who answered only to him. In Persian culture, where bonds between women provided emotional survival, this separation was especially cruel. She was cut off from every source of comfort she had ever known. She had no freedom of movement, no privacy, no control over her own body. Ancient hints suggest she tried to send messages back to the palace, quiet pleas for help. But no response ever came. Xerxes, ashamed yet unwilling to admit fault, remained silent. That silence became another prison wall. What followed was worse. Sources are careful with language, but the meaning is clear. Despite his age, Artabanus demanded frequent and forced intimacy. His obsession was not affection. It was legacy. He wanted a son with royal blood, a child that would secure his power forever. Court records mention payments to physicians, fertility experts, herbs, and treatments meant to increase conception. None of this was for her well-being. She was not treated as a wife. She was treated as a vessel. 3 years into the marriage, she became pregnant. For Artabanus, it was triumph. For her, it was terror. Because a mother of a royal child could never leave, her fate would be sealed permanently. Servants later recalled her pregnancy as deeply sorrowful. She spent long hours staring toward palace gardens she was forbidden to enter. She often refused food. Attendants had to force her to eat. The girl who once danced freely now moved only with fear. Labor lasted to brutal days. Court midwives recorded severe complications. When the child was born, a weak baby boy, Artabanus named him Xerxes, claiming honor and destiny. Physicians warned the child might not survive. Artabanus ignored them and planned celebrations. 10 days later, the baby died. Official records blamed illness, but whispers spread fast. Some claimed the mother, shattered by despair, had ended the child's life. Others believed servants allowed neglect out of pity. No proof exists, but the rumors themselves reveal how unbearable her existence had become. The child's death broke something inside Artabanus, convinced she or her attendants were responsible. His control turned violent. Servants heard screams behind closed doors. They saw bruises on her arms and face. One record mentions a beating so severe she could not leave her bed for weeks. Her body healed. Her mind did not. She stopped resisting, stopped pleading. She ate only when forced. She spoke rarely. She moved like a shadow. The young woman was still alive, but whatever spirit she once had was gone. Eventually, word reached Xerxes. Only then did he seem to understand the scale of his betrayal. Some sources suggest he sent private warnings to Artabanus, urging gentler treatment. But the warning came too late, because Artabanus knew the truth. The king who sacrificed his daughter to protect his image had no power left to protect her now. Artabanus understood. something Xerxes refused to admit. The king had already chosen pride over his daughter once. He would not do it again. When Xerxes' warnings reached him, Artabanus answered with quiet reminders. The marriage had been approved publicly. Persian law gave a husband full authority over his wife. To interfere now would expose the king's earlier weakness. Xerxes stepped back, and with that step, her suffering became permanent. Years passed in silence. She remained confined, watched, controlled. Her world shrank to walls and shadows. Servants described her as distant, empty, moving through days without purpose. She no longer asked for help. Hope had been worn down completely. 14 years after that banquet, the palace finally erupted. Xerxes was assassinated in a sudden coup. The leader was Artabanus himself. Motives were many: power, succession, resentment. But some accounts claim he twisted her suffering into justification. He reportedly called Xerxes weak, a ruler who sacrificed his own daughter for appearance alone. The cruelty he committed became the excuse he used to murder the man who allowed it. For a brief time, Artabanus ruled from behind the throne. 7 months later, Xerxes' son, Artaxerxes, struck back. Loyal guards stormed the palace. Artabanus was confronted and killed violently. His rise ended the same way he had lived, through force. Freedom should have followed, it did not. She was 28 by then, but witnesses said she looked far older. Her hair had turned gray early. Her face was hollow. Artaxerxes offered her comfort, space, independence. She accepted none of it. She rarely left her rooms. She avoided gatherings. Silence became her shelter. Once, musicians played a melody she had danced to as a child. The night before everything was taken, she screamed, shattered instruments, collapsed in tears. The first tears anyone had seen in years. She never recovered. She died at 36. Records speak vaguely of illness. Modern scholars suspect slow starvation or a body destroyed by long despair. Those who knew her understood the truth. She did not die that year. She died the night her father said granted. After Xerxes stepped back, the palace learned a dangerous lesson. Once a king sacrifices his own blood to protect his image, no one beneath him is truly safe. Artabanus moved with confidence now. He no longer feared intervention. He understood that the man who caused the damage could not undo it without destroying himself. Her isolation deepened. Years passed with no change, no relief, no rescue. Servants noticed how time seemed to stop round her. Seasons shifted outside. Rulers rose and fell. But inside her rooms, everything remained frozen. She lived by routine alone. Wake, sit, eat when ordered, sleep without rest. She no longer asked questions. She no longer reacted. Those closest to her sensed something frightening. She was not healing. She was disappearing. When palace women whispered about her, they did so carefully. Her story had become a warning. Proof that proximity to power was not privilege, but risk, especially for women whose lives could be traded without consent. Xerxes, meanwhile, continued ruling. He attended ceremonies, planned monuments, spoke of legacy. Publicly, nothing had changed. Privately, guilt followed him. Yet guilt without action changed nothing. His daughter remained where he had placed her dot, and so the court moved forward, pretending stability had been preserved. But history was already preparing its response. Because power built on silence never lasts. As years passed, the damage became impossible to hide. Those assigned to serve her saw a slow collapse that no command could reverse. Her body weakened, her voice softened until it was barely used at all. She did not resist orders anymore, not because she accepted them, but because resistance no longer felt possible. Artabanus grew harsher with time. The more control he gained in the palace, the more he tightened it over her. He spoke of loyalty and tradition, but his actions revealed fear. Fear that without force, he would lose the power he had stolen through marriage. Rumors moved quietly through servant quarters. Bruises seen, cries heard, then denied. No one intervened. Everyone remembered the night the king chose pride over protection. That memory kept mouths closed. Xerxes received reports. He knew she was breaking, yet each time he considered stepping in, he faced the same truth. To undo her suffering would be to admit his own failure before the empire. And so he did nothing. That decision, repeated again and again, became its own kind of violence. The court stayed silent. The king stayed silent, and her suffering continued, unchallenged, year after year. Everything finally shifted the night the palace turned on itself. Xerxes was killed in a sudden, violent coup. The shock moved fast through the halls that had once celebrated him as divine. At the center of the plot stood Artabanus, the same man who had taken a young girl through a broken promise, now claimed the throne through blood. Some accounts say he spoke of justice. Others say he spoke of weakness. He painted Xerxes as a ruler who had lost judgment, a man who could not protect his own household. It was a cruel irony. The suffering he had inflicted became the excuse he used to destroy the king who allowed it. For a brief moment, Artabanus controlled the palace. Orders were given in his name. Guards obeyed him. But power gained through betrayal does not last. Xerxes' son, Artaxerxes, gathered loyal forces and struck back. The confrontation was brutal and quick. Artabanus was killed by the royal guard, his body left where he fell. His ambition ended the same way it had begun, through violence. The man who had controlled her life was gone. But freedom did not follow, because by then the damage was complete after Artabanus was killed. The palace tried to repair what could not be fixed. Artaxerxes, now king, ordered that she be given her own quarters. He allowed her servants of choice, freedom of movement, and distance from court politics. On paper, her life was restored. In reality, nothing changed. She rarely left her rooms. She avoided gatherings and ceremonies. She spoke only when required. The world outside felt foreign, unsafe, meaningless. Years of control had trained her silence deeper than any command. Those who served her noticed signs of early aging. Her hair grayed long before its time. Her posture bent inward, as if she were always bracing for harm that no longer came. Freedom arrived too late to be understood. One day, musicians were sent to lift her spirits. They played a melody from her childhood, a song she once danced to in the palace halls. The sound broke something inside her. She screamed, overturned instruments, collapsed into tears. The first anyone had seen since she was a child. It was also the last moment she truly reacted to the world. From then on, she faded quietly, unseen, unheard, remembered by almost no one. She died years later, still young, though her body carried the weight of a lifetime. Official records spoke only of illness, using careful words that explained nothing. Those who knew her understood better. Her body failed because her will had been drained away piece by piece. Some believe she stopped eating. Others believe despair simply hollowed her until nothing remained. Either way, her death was slow, quiet, and unnoticed. In truth, she had died long before. She died the night her father chose his image over her life. Everything after was only survival without living. History moved on. Xerxes was remembered as a great ruler, a builder, a challenger of Greece. His daughter was erased. No monument carries her name. No inscription honors her suffering. She survives only in fragments, in whispers recorded by outsiders. In the gaps where her voice should have been, her story forces us to face an uncomfortable truth. The worst cruelty does not always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from those with absolute power, who harm without raising a hand. One promise, one word, one moment of pride, and a life is destroyed. That is why what was done to her was worse than death. If you stayed until the end, leave a comment with her name and tell us where you're watching from. Remembering her is the only justice history left behind.